The Skaven spells of stealth are of course a lore that was added alongside Deathmaster Snitch and his Eshin sorcerers. It comes with several powerful spells for damage as well as buffs, debuffs and a lot of disruption to pair well with that sneaky tricksy playstyle. It is a unique lore for sure, but even when stacked against the other two extremely powerful Skaven lores, it holds up decently and it's powerful in its own right. Speaking of becoming powerful, why not increase your brain power with today's sponsor, Skillshare? Just in case you've been living under a rock, Skillshare is the online learning community with thousands of classes if you want to learn a new skill or just generally be creative. If you have a specific skill that you want to learn, then Skillshare likely has something for you, whether that's photography, graphic design, or making videos like this. This month, I've been watching the YouTube Success Chance by MKBHD. If you're all interested in making YouTube videos of any kind, then I highly recommend checking it out. Instead of just going into detail about the step-by-step guide of making videos, he gives some great tips on the point of making videos and how to get a good mindset that sets you up for making enjoyable content. Don't get me wrong, he also gives you some tips on the step-by-steps, but it's more about the general mindset and the approach that you have to making videos, rather than the actual process of doing the thing. As for you though, there are still thousands of other classes out there and there is definitely something that you'd find interesting. Skillshare is also ad-free, it gets new classes added every single month, and it also has subtitles in Spanish, French, German, and Portuguese, so if English isn't your first language and one of those is, then that helps you out a lot. If this all sounds like something you'd be interested in, then check out the link in the description. The first 1,000 people to click that link will get 1 month free of premium to check out Skillshare. Huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, it really helps me out so much. And now, onto the spells. Of course, the Skaven are the only faction that can use this lore. First up, we have the passive of the lore, Toxic Rain. Whoa. This targets enemy units on the entire map and causes them to suffer the Toxic Rain stats effect for 8 seconds. As usual, it's passive, so you want to use your actual spells when it works best for them, and just enjoy this passive as an added bonus. With this one, you can get the most value out of it by casting your spells once the enemy is engaged and dealing damage to your troops, as the stats effect will reduce pretty much all forms of damage in melee and from a range. On top of this, the speed reduction will make every unit on the enemy side slower and easier to catch or hit from a range, so it can never really do badly there. The effect does have a very short duration, but even so you can reduce a significant amount of damage from the enemy force if it's well timed. Our first castable spell is Skit Leap. This is a hiding spell, costs 4 winds of magic, and has a 29-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on allied units, and has a 200 meter cast range. The affected unit is hidden, gains 25% speed, stalk, and unspottable for 25 seconds. This of course wants to be used to move some of your own units without the enemies seeing them. Ranged units will be spotted if they fire during the stealth, so reserve this for units you want to truly flank with and hit the enemy when they least expect it from an angle they won't see coming. The speed increase will allow your units to more easily move into position before the enemy can spot them and mean you can pull out flanks that would otherwise be impossible. So to keep things simple, use it on any unit you want to use to flank the enemy, like melee infantry or monsters. If you're going to insist on using range, then stop them from firing until they get into position to maintain their stealth. The Overcast increases the cost to 8 winds of magic, and grants the spell a 40 meter area of effect. This allows you to turn multiple units invisible to get them into position for a massive flank or run away from approaching enemies and reposition where it best suits you. You'll still be using it pretty much the same, and you should only really go for this Overcast when you want to use stealth with more than just one unit. Next up we have Warp Stars. This is a magic missile spell, costs 4 winds of magic, and has a 28-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on enemy units and has a 200 meter cast range. It causes moderate magical damage and is strong versus single units, with good damage versus armor, and of course benefits from a high angle. Of course you want to use this to target those single entities that are too tough for your army to take out otherwise. Great choices are armored lords and heroes, just make sure you have a clear line of sight from your caster to their targets, otherwise you risk hitting other units or the ground, neither of which are really ideal. Pretty straightforward spell to use, find a target that's going to be hard to take out, send some damage their way to make it a bit easier. The Overcast increases the cost to 7 winds of magic and increases the number of missiles. This of course increases the potential damage the spell can do, so you want to use this when your target is likely to shrug off the base cast. Most of the time the Overcast is the better choice since the base cast isn't going to one-shot anything, just make sure you've got the winds and HP on your caster, just in case of a miscast. Armor of Darkness is next up. This is an augment spell, costs 7 winds of magic and has a 43-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on allied units and has a 200 meter cast range. The affected unit gains 20% missile resistance, 60 armor for a 33-second duration. This is a great spell for massively increasing the toughness of the target unit. That flat 20% missile resist is going to let them shrug off a ton of damage that would otherwise cause them a lot of grief. The armor is also a massive increase, so all forms of damage are going to hit a lot softer, and overall you're going to turn the target unit into an absolute tank. You of course want to use this on a unit that's about to take a bunch of damage to keep them safe, and give the rest of your army time to shut down the enemy to keep them safe once the spell runs out. A great target for this is of course anything that's on the front lines, since chances are they're going to be getting hit with melee and ranged damage from every direction. The Overcast increases the cost to 11 winds of magic and grants a 40 meter area of effect to the spell. This is a great buff and allows you to spread this great effect to multiple units as long as they all fit into the area of effect. You of course want to plop this down in the middle of your front lines and hit as many units as possible to spread the effects far and wide and turn your units into an incredibly tanky wall of armor and resistance. Next up we have Veil of Shadows. This is a vortex spell, costs 12 winds of magic and has a 38-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on the ground and has a 150 meter cast range. It causes no damage, does not affect friendly troops, and is a huge stationary area of effect that can disrupt enemy formations and lasts for 26 seconds. This is basically a way to toss enemies around to either allow some of your units to escape them or get deeper into their lines and take them out quicker, and you can only really decide which one you need to do for yourself. The no damage means you're going to get no value casting this on random units, so you want to target this specifically on units you need to get past. For example, if you want to get through enemy front lines but they're too tough and in the way, then this cast will let you flood your units through the gaps left from this massive disruption and either take out the units in the way or push past them into the back lines. This is Onslay, a really weird spell to use, and the use case is really dependent on the armies you're playing with and against. The Overcast increases the cost to 16 winds of magic and adds minus 45% speed and minus 8 leadership to enemy units hit. This pushes the spell towards something you should use to try to focus down the unit you cast it on rather than pushing straight past them. The leadership debuff combined with the fact that they basically can't defend themselves will make it much easier to get deep into an enemy unit and focus them down. Just cast it on enemies your units are close to, otherwise it's really pointless. Brittle Bone is next up. This is a hex spell, costs 11 winds of magic and has a 47-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on enemy units and has a 200 meter cast range. The affected units suffer minus 25% speed, minus 40 melee defense, and minus 9% vigor for 39 seconds. This is a massive amount of debuffs to place in a unit and will make them easy to take out if you focus them once it's casted. That defense reduction will cause nearly every hit to land on even the most elite of enemy defenders. The speed will mean they cannot run away no matter how hard they try, and that vigor reduction will ensure that they tire out much quicker. You of course want to use this on the most dangerous units on the enemy lines, then focus them down as hard as you can to take them out whilst the debuffs last. Of course the target unit only becomes more vulnerable in melee, so if you're focusing them with range, it won't make any difference. The Overcast increases the cost to 18 winds of magic and adds a 40 meter area of effect to the spell. This allows you to place these massive debuffs on as many enemy units as you can fit into their area of effect, which is of course great for reducing the capabilities of a large chunk of the enemy front lines. You still want to focus down the target units in melee as fast as you can, so make sure you're bringing some powerful monsters as infantry to complete the job this spell starts. Now final spell is Black Whirlwind. This is a vortex spell, costs 15 winds of magic and has a 47-second cooldown. It can only be targeted on the ground and has a 150 meter cast range. It causes moderate magical damage in a huge stationary area of effect that can disrupt enemy formations and is of course strongest versus multiple units and is decent versus armor. And it all lasts for 17 seconds. With most vortexes, you're worried about it moving into your own units, but this one is stationary, so as long as you get that first placement right, you'll be raking in the damage and wiping enemies off the field with ease. The damage is pretty powerful, so place it on the biggest clump of elite infantry that you can and watch them get tossed around and torn to shreds. Of course, you want to make sure that you don't catch your own units in this area, although they don't walk into it once the enemy starts to take damage and be tossed around, otherwise that damage is going to hurt you just as bad as the enemy. Aside from that, you should be all good, and just find a blob and drop a cast for a ton of value. The Overcast increases the cost to 20 winds of magic and increases the armor piercing damage. This makes it even better versus the toughest of enemies, so if the infantry clump is particularly tanky and armored, then you can't go wrong with an Overcast. You still want to use it the same and have your troops avoid it like the plague to escape some very nasty damage. The only difference now is even more damage for whatever gets caught in the maelstrom. And that concludes this guide on the Skaven spells of stealth. Let me know what you think of this lore in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of this video by leaving a like or a dislike. And if you want to see more content like this, then be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. If you're feeling especially big penis, you can become a supporter either by joining the membership system here on YouTube or becoming a patron on the Patreon. Doing so gets shoutouts at the end of videos, as well as early access to behind the scenes and exclusive voting power for future content. I'd like to thank Henry Tucker for his support at the officers tier, and of course all supporters for their support at every single tier. And one final thank you for watching. For now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.